Most people with a little land think chickens are the obvious first animal. That makes sense. Chickens are familiar. They give eggs. They're easy to understand, and almost every beginner homesteading video tells people to start there. But if I had only half an acre, I wouldn't automatically start with chickens. Half an acre can produce real food, but it has to be used carefully. You don't have unlimited pasture. You don't have endless room for mistakes. Every animal has to earn its space, solve a real problem, and fit into a routine a normal person can actually keep up with. That's where chickens aren't always the best first choice. They can scratch up garden beds. They can attract predators and rodents if feed is handled poorly. They need secure housing. Roosters are a problem almost everywhere, and in some neighborhoods, even hens are restricted. Chickens can absolutely work later, but before I use my limited space on a chicken flock, I'd look at animals that solve problems chickens don't solve as well. Animals that use less ground, need less noise tolerance, turn waste into feed, control pests, produce quiet meat, manage grass, or create protein in places chickens can't touch. That's what this video is about. 7 animals I'd raise on half an acre before chickens. Not because chickens are bad, but because on limited land, the first animal should match the biggest pressure point on the property. Stay with this to the end, because I'll show you which animal can start on a shelf, which one uses vertical space instead of land, which one patrols pests, which one works the wet corners, which one turns water into protein, which one makes grass productive, and which one I'd only add after the half acre is fenced and managed properly. The first animal is mealworms. This isn't the animal most people expect first, but if space is tight, money is limited, and you're trying to build food independence without overwhelming yourself, mealworms make more sense than people think. Mealworms don't need pasture. They don't need a coop. They don't need a pond. They don't make noise. They don't bother neighbors. They can be raised in plastic drawers, shallow bins, shelves, or a small indoor corner. That matters on half an acre because the smartest first animal isn't always the one that looks most impressive. Sometimes the smartest first animal is the one that builds a feed source before the bigger animals arrive. Mealworms turn wheat bran, oats, grain scraps, vegetable peelings, carrots, potatoes, and small amounts of kitchen waste into protein-rich feed. They can be used for birds, reptiles, some fish systems, and poultry treats depending on how they're raised and handled. A starter setup can be simple: a few shallow plastic bins or drawers, dry bedding like bran or oats, a moisture source like carrots or potatoes, a warm, dry plate, good airflow, and a basic routine for separating beetles, larvae, and pupae once the colony grows. You're not building fencing. You're not buying a coop. You're not giving up garden space. The daily care is small. Check the moisture, add food when needed, remove moldy material. Keep the bedding dry. Watch the colony so it doesn't crash from neglect or moisture problems. That routine can take less time than feeding a flock of birds. The output isn't a full meal by itself, and that's important to understand. Mealworms aren't here to feed your family directly. They're here to make the next animals easier to support. If you eventually raise ducks, quail, chickens, fish, or insect-eating pets, mealworms can become a homegrown protein boost. If you want a small side market, live mealworms can be sold to reptile owners, backyard poultry keepers, bird owners, bait buyers, and hobby farmers. Dried mealworms can also work as poultry treats when handled and packaged properly. The mistake is treating them like a garbage can. Mealworms need a dry, controlled setup. Too much moisture creates mold. Poor airflow creates problems. Neglect slows the colony down. And if you want to sell them, you need clean production and buyers who trust the source. This is the lowest pressure animal on the list. Quiet. It's small. It teaches routine. It creates feed. And it can start before the property's ready for larger livestock. That's why I'd consider mealworms before chickens. Small bins can feed bigger systems. The second animal is utility pigeons. Utility pigeons are one of the most overlooked small space meat animals, and that's exactly why they belong here. Most people don't think of pigeons as livestock anymore. They think of them as city birds, park birds, or old-fashioned farm animals from another era. But for half an acre, that old-fashioned reputation is part of the opportunity. Utility pigeons produce squab, which is young pigeon harvested before it leaves the nest. It's tender, dark, rich meat, and in some culinary markets it's treated as a specialty product. But even if you never sell a single bird, pigeons can still provide family protein from a very small footprint. Their biggest advantage is that they use vertical space. Chickens spread outward. Pigeons stack upward. A small loft can fit against a shed wall, inside a garage corner, in a barn corner, or in a simple structure with nest boxes and perches. You're not fencing off a large run. You're not giving up a full garden area. You're turning unused wall space or outbuilding space into production. A basic setup needs a dry loft, good ventilation, nest boxes, perches, predator protection, clean water, and grain. The housing has to be secure because pigeons are vulnerable to rats, raccoons, cats, hawks, and other predators if the loft is poorly built. The daily routine is straightforward. Feed grain, check water, look over the birds, watch the pairs, keep the loft clean enough that smell, pests, and disease don't build up. Once breeding pairs are established, pigeons do much of the raising themselves. The pair incubates the eggs and feeds the squabs. That's why they can feel so efficient compared with animals that require more hands-on breeding management. The output is steady, but not flashy. A few good breeding pairs can produce a small supply of meat from a space that would be useless for larger livestock. If there's a specialty market nearby, restaurants, cultural buyers, or direct customers may value squab, but that demand needs to be confirmed before scaling. That's the mistake. Don't assume everyone wants pigeon meat just because it's productive. Some areas may have no real buyer base. In that case, pigeons may be better as a household protein source than a business. But as a half-acre animal, they make a lot of sense. They're quiet, they're compact, they use vertical space, they reproduce without constant intervention, and they can produce meat without taking over the land. Utility pigeons are best for someone who wants quiet meat production, has a shed or outbuilding corner, and is willing to build the loft properly before buying birds. They're not glamorous. That's why most people miss them. The third animal is guinea fowl. Guinea fowl aren't calm little backyard pets. They're loud. They're alert. They're strange. They move around like a patrol unit with feathers. And if you have close neighbors who care about noise, they may be the wrong animal completely. But if your half-acre has ticks, grasshoppers, beetles, snakes, predator pressure, or garden pests, guinea fowl can earn their place fast. Their value isn't only eggs, their value is patrol. Guinea fowl are known for hunting insects across a property. They move constantly, scan constantly, and react loudly when something changes. That makes them useful in areas where tick pressure is serious, where garden pests build up, or where you want a living alarm system around the property. Chickens can eat bugs too, but chickens also scratch garden beds apart, dig through mulch, and often need strong protection from predators. Guinea fowl are more alert, more mobile, and more defensive as a group. That's why they can come before chickens on certain half-acre properties. A beginner's setup needs a secure shelter, roosting space, predator protection, feed, water, and a training period. The training period matters. Guinea fowl raised from keats are much more likely to recognize your property as home than adult birds dropped onto land and expected to stay. It's one of the biggest beginner mistakes. People buy adult guineas, release them, and then wonder why the birds wander, roost in trees, scream at everything, or refuse to go into shelter at night. Start young if you can. Train them to the coop. Feed them in the same place. Build the routine early. Daily care is simple in theory. Feed them. Provide water. Let them range where it's safe. Call them back. Close them in at night. But the real management is about getting them to understand where home is and protecting them before they become reliable. The output is layered. They produce eggs, though usually not as consistently as a dedicated chicken flock. Their eggs are smaller, rich, and useful for a homestead. But the bigger value is pest reduction, alerting, and land function. Over time, that can change how the property feels. Fewer ticks, fewer insects, more warning when something is moving near the flock, less reliance on chemical pest control. Guinea fowl are best for someone with enough distance from neighbors, real pest pressure, and a willingness to tolerate noise in exchange for function. They're not quiet. They're useful. The fourth animal is Muscovy ducks. If I had half an acre and wanted ducks before chickens, I'd look closely at Muscovies. They're not like the ducks most people picture. Muscovy ducks are much quieter than many common duck breeds because they don't quack the same way. They hiss, trill, and make softer sounds. On a small property, that can matter a lot. Their value comes from what they do in messy places. Muscovies are strong foragers. They eat flies, mosquitoes, slugs, snails, beetles, weeds, and fallen fruit. They can work around orchards, gardens, compost areas, wet corners, and places where insects build up. On half an acre, those edges matter. A wet corner that frustrates you can become duck territory. Fallen fruit that attracts pests can become feed. Bug pressure around the garden can become part of the flock's job. Muscovies produce eggs, but their biggest strength is often meat. Muscovy meat is leaner and more red meat-like than many other duck breeds. For someone who wants poultry that feels different from chicken, that can be valuable. They also raise young well when allowed to brood, which can make them useful for a small self-renewing flock if the setup is managed carefully. The setup doesn't have to be fancy. They need a secure shelter, predator protection, bedding, feed, and clean water deep enough to wash their faces and keep themselves healthy. A small pool tub or water station can work. They don't need a giant pond, but they do need water management. That's the mistake beginners make. Ducks are wet animals. Even quiet ducks can create mud, smell, and bedding problems if the water is placed poorly. On half an acre, bad water placement can ruin the whole setup quickly, so the system has to be built around drainage. Put water where overflow can help a garden, orchard, compost zone, mulch basin, or planted area instead of turning the shelter into a swamp. Keep bedding dry. Move them when the ground gets too pressured. Lock them up safely at night. The daily routine is practical. Feed them, refresh water, collect eggs if they're laying, check the bedding, make sure the wet area isn't becoming a mud pit. Watch for predators. Over time, the payoff is clear. Fewer pests, useful eggs, strong meat potential, and a bird that handles wet conditions better than chickens. Muscovy ducks are best for someone with a garden, orchard, wet edge, bug pressure, or a need for quiet poultry that produces both meat and eggs. They're not just another duck. They're a half-acre cleanup crew with wings. The fifth animal is tilapia. This is where half an acre stops being only land. Because if you only think in terms of pens, coops, pasture, and garden beds, you miss one of the most productive layers a small property can have: water. Tilapia can turn tanks, ponds, greenhouse systems, or aquaponic setups into protein production without taking pasture away from other animals. That's why they belong before chickens for certain properties. A fish tank doesn't compete with sheep for grass. It doesn't compete with ducks for garden patrol. It doesn't need a grazing paddock. It creates food in a layer of the property many people never use. Tilapia are popular in small food systems because they grow quickly, tolerate a range of water conditions, and can work in aquaponics when the system is built correctly. The fish produce waste. The waste feeds plants. The plants help clean the water. The system can create both fish and greens from the same setup. A beginner setup can be a tank, an IBC tote, a greenhouse corner, or a small pond depending on climate and rule. You need water volume, aeration, filtration, temperature control if your climate is cold, and a plan for backup power. This isn't the easiest animal on the list, but it's one of the best pattern interrupts for a small property because it creates food without using more ground. The products are fish for the household, fish for local buyers where legal, and greens or herbs from the aquaponic side. In many small systems, the plants may be more valuable than the fish because herbs and greens can be harvested repeatedly. The daily routine isn't hard, but it has to be consistent. Feed the fish, check water temperature, watch oxygen, monitor water quality, make sure pumps and aeration are working, remove problems before they crash the system. The mistake is thinking fish are low maintenance because they're out of sight. They're not. Water quality matters, oxygen matters, temperature matters, stocking density matters, feed matters, backup power matters. If oxygen drops or a pump fails, the system can collapse quickly. Tilapia also need the right climate or controlled temperature. In colder regions, heating can become a major cost, and that changes the economics fast. So tilapia aren't the first animal I'd recommend for every beginner, but on half an acre, especially with a greenhouse, warm climate, or aquaponic plan, they can add a food layer that land animals can't provide. They're best for someone who wants fish protein, plant production, and a system that uses water instead of pasture. Tilapia turn a tank into acreage. The sixth animal is a miniature sheep. On half an acre, grass can either be a chore or a resource. Miniature sheep help turn it into a resource. Chickens don't manage grass very well. They scratch, peck, and disturb soil, but they aren't true grazers. Sheep are. A small group of miniature sheep can maintain grass, cycle manure, reduce mowing, and add meat, wool, or breeding value depending on the breed and market. I'd look at smaller sheep breeds used for small acreage, orchard systems, or controlled grazing. Baby doll Southdown sheep are one example people often mention because of their low height, calm reputation, and usefulness in orchard-style settings. The setup needs more planning than the earlier animals. You need secure fencing, you need shelter, you need minerals, you need water, you need dry ground, you need a plan for hoof care, parasites, and winter feed. You also need to understand that half an acre can be overgrazed quickly if the animals stay in one place too long. That's the key. This isn't about turning sheep loose and hoping the land handles it. It's about controlled grazing, rest periods, temporary fencing, and careful stalking. The daily routine depends on the setup. Check water, check fencing, move them when the grass needs rest, watch body condition, watch hooves, watch parasite pressure. Make sure the land is recovering instead of being eaten down to dirt. The output can be meat, wool, breeding stock, manure, and reduced mowing. The value isn't always one giant income stream. Sometimes the value is that the same animal maintains grass, improves fertility, and produces something useful. Compared with chickens, miniature sheep use a completely different layer of the property. They take the grass layer, which many small landowners only mow, and make it part of the food system. But they aren't cheap lawn ornaments. That's the mistake. Sheep still need management. If fencing is weak, parasites are ignored, or winter feed isn't planned, the setup gets expensive quickly. Miniature sheep are best for someone who has actual grass, a secure fence, a rotation plan, and a reason to turn mowing into production. They're not the smallest animal on the list, but they may be one of the best at making the land itself work harder. The seventh animal is KuneKune pigs. This is the animal I wouldn't add first, but it's one of the most interesting animals to consider once the half acre is planned, fenced, and managed properly. KuneKune pigs are different from the image many people have of pigs destroying everything in sight. They're smaller, slower-growing grazing pigs, known for being more pasture-oriented than many commercial pig breeds. That doesn't mean they can't damage land. Any pig can damage land when it's mismanaged. But compared with rooting-heavy pigs, KuneKunes can be more compatible with small acreage systems when stalking, fencing, and rotation are handled correctly. Their value comes from cleanup and conversion. They can eat fallen fruit, garden surplus, weeds, forage, crop leftovers, and other farm extras. They can help clean up orchard drops, finish garden waste, and turn low-value material into pork. That's why they belong at the end of this list. They aren't the cheapest or simplest first animal, but once the half acre has fencing, routines, and waste streams, they can become a finishing animal that captures value other animals leave behind. The setup has to be serious: a strong fencing, shelter, shade, water, feed, rotation, a processing plan, a place where pigs can move without destroying the only usable part of the property. Daily care isn't complicated, but it's non-negotiable. Feed them, check water, check fencing, watch the ground, move them before the area is destroyed. Keep them comfortable in heat and weather. Compared with chickens, KuneKunes create a different product and use a different part of the system. Chickens scratch and peck. KuneKunes graze, clean, and convert heavier material into meat. The product is pork, and pork has strong demand when it's raised well and marketed directly. Customers may value pasture-raised pork, local pork, whole or half hog shares, and a breed story that separates it from grocery store meat. They're still pigs. They're strong. They're smart. They need management. And on half an acre, the land can't absorb unlimited pressure. You can't keep adding pigs and expect the property to handle it. KuneKunes work best in small numbers, with tight control, clear purpose, and a plan for where they go next. They're best for someone who already has a working property, extra produce or forage to use, strong fencing, and buyers who want premium local pork. That's why I wouldn't start with them. I'd build toward them. KuneKune pigs can turn leftovers into one of the most valuable products on the property, but only after the property is ready. Now let's put the list together. If I had half an acre and wanted to think beyond chickens, I'd start with the animal that matches the biggest problem on the property. If space is almost non-existent, start with mealworms. If you want quiet meat from a tiny footprint, look at utility pigeons. If ticks, bugs, and alerting matter most, consider guinea fowl. If the land has wet corners, flies, garden pests, or a need for quiet poultry, Muscovy ducks may fit. If you want protein without using more ground, tilapia can turn water into production. If grass management is the problem, miniature sheep may make more sense than another bird. And if the property already has fencing, waste streams, and a direct market plan, KuneKune pigs can become the finishing layer. The lesson isn't that chickens are bad. The lesson is that chickens aren't always the first answer. On half an acre, every animal needs a job. Some jobs are eggs, some jobs are meat, some jobs are pest control, Some jobs are fertility, some jobs are feed production, some jobs are land management, and some jobs are turning leftovers into a product people actually want. That's how a small property becomes productive without becoming chaotic. Don't start with 7 animals. Start with 1 pressure point. Pick the animal that solves that pressure point with the least space, least conflict, and clearest output. Then master it before adding the next layer. That's how half an acre starts acting bigger than it really is. If this helped you think differently about what belongs on small land, subscribe to Backyard Farm Profits for more practical small farm systems, and tell me in the comments, if you had half an acre, which animal would you raise before chickens?